with me today is John Cameron and Leon Brathwaite. I am James Just. And gentlemen, there's been a difference in how the media has been approaching a big news story recently. The attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, and his name escapes me at the moment.
Paul
Pelosi. Thank you, Leon. It's a disturbing event, right? None of us here like political violence, or maybe in this case, it's not even political violence. Maybe some mental health issues kind of wrapped up in it.
Maybe. I don't think there's any maybe.
I'm trying to be polite here, John. We're trying to be polite. But the way the media has covered this event, because for those of us in the libertarian circles, we saw Rand Paul attacked 2-3 times, I believe it was.
Yes.
And there was no media coverage of this way. There was none of this.
Bad.
Yeah,
He's libertarian, he's bad.
And then we've got the plot against Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh, that the media essentially brushed under the rug. They covered it for a couple hours.
Yeah, a couple hours, and that was it.
And that was
Page 20 something of the New York Times.
820, I think, is what it was on.
And so, how can we have a functional democracy, a functional society, if the news media, the people who are supposed to hold, those in power accountable, won't even hold themselves accountable to cover stories in a similar fashion? We're not even actually expecting them to cover exactly, but you would expect similar type coverage, would you not?
No, I don't. No, I don't. But Leon's the expert on this probably, and I'd like to hear what he has to say. Yeah.
Well, even though we are talking about the hypocrisy in the media, and that is very evident in this case and in others, we prior to these set of current events you're talking about, I don't know if you remember the Steve Scalise, who is a member of Congress from Louisiana, who was shot and is still suffering from the effects of that. And he was shot by a Bernie Sanders supporter. The media, yes, they covered it, blah, 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 but it was not a big deal. But now Paul Pelosi, who is Nancy Pelosi's husband, Nancy Pelosi, of course, is being the Speaker of the House. She's second in line to the presidency. And now
just dismissing Kamala because they're going to jump right past her anyway.
Yeah, well, so but the point is, though, you're seeing the hypocrisy. It is obvious, it's evident. Brett Kavanaugh, the same thing, covered it for a few hours. The Biden administration took no strong position against all the people who were marching in front of his home. When the assassination attempt was uncovered, they must have made some perfunctory statements about the problem, but no big deal. Chuck Schumer stood on the steps of the Supreme Court and talked about, the whirlwind will be unleashed on Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. But there's a more fundamental problem here that is ongoing in our society that is quite dangerous. There is a bunch of selective prosecutions that are going on, and a tolerance of violence, a tolerance of lawlessness that is also going on. And the hypocrisy is showing up in these ways in the media. So that when, for instance, we had all these people burning down our cities in the summer of 2020, you know what the media was calling that? Mostly peaceful protests, okay? There's one absurd situation where CNN had somebody on the air covering this stuff. In his background, on air, in his background, was something burning down, and CNN had a banner right there saying, fiery but mostly peaceful. I'm not joking about it. You could check it. It's on the internet. But the point is, though, we have in these selective prosecutions, which is bad, and we also have in this tolerance of lawlessness in our society, which is also bad. And we got to be very careful, because this leads to chaos, it leads to totalitarianism, it leads to all the bad stuff that we should not have in our constitutional republic.
I absolutely agree, and I remember Sacramento is still, downtown Sacramento still bears the scars of riots.
Yes.
And those were cited as completely justified.
Yes.
And the property loss was, the businesses that were looted were basically, they used this as an excuse for organized looting and crime. They got it coming because of what's been going on in this country since the Civil War, and the insurance companies will pay for it, so you don't have to worry. And so, insurance companies. Insurance companies are owned by mutual funds, and mutual funds are what pays widows and orphans.
Yes.
And
retirees is like myself.
And retirees.
Yes.
And what without the ability to cover without the ability to predict the costs of covering businesses from risks. Even though a lot of times, rioting and stuff is not covered, but you can get a rider for anything. If people can't do actuarial calculations with the understanding that the police might at least make an attempt to stop crime, like the same thing happened in LA. They stood and watched Korean businesses burn to the ground and do nothing.
Exactly.
But and again, you talked about selective prosecution. None of those people prosecuted. Yet they're, reaching out and arresting people and charging them, basically with felonies for making anti-abortion clinic statements on TV. They're reaching out to and arresting people who were in a peaceful part of what do they call it, the insurrection on January 6th?
Yeah.
The January 6th is another, I don't condone it.
No,
I still want to see videotape of who let those people in, because you couldn't break those doors down with a tank.
Yes.
Literally, you couldn't. They're designed to withhold a tank.
Exactly.
So, but that's called an armed insurrection, and that was called a violent armed insurrection over and over and over again. One person was shot, and it was one of the
protesters.
One of the protesters was
Ashley
shot
Babbitt.
by a security guard in the neck, and nothing
Yes.
was ever done. So we're talking about very selective prosecution of people. We're talking about the turning courts and turning laws into political arms of the government in power.
Exactly.
But only if that government in power is big government and deep state. If it's any other government in power, they are resistant to the government. So we basically now have politicized FBI, politicized courts, politicized prosecutors, and you're absolutely right. It spells the end of civilization if something isn't done about it, our civilization.
Exactly. And you bring up this Ashley Babbitt on the January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few months prior, this January 6th was 2021. In the summer of 2020, they were burning down our cities. Why? Why were they burning down our cities? They claimed that police were shooting black people, okay? And unjustly shooting black people is what they were claiming. And it was amazing. When January 6th occurred, a Capitol Hill police officer, who ironically turned out to be black, shot this woman who was unarmed. And nothing was ever done to him, okay? And these people who were out there protesting, who are talking about how police officers are out of control, who are doing all of these horrible things, especially in particular to black people, and all these other things. Those same people never said a single word about the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. To this day, they have said nothing about that shooting, and I cannot to this day find a justification as to why that police officer shot her. I don't know, I've not read, maybe there is one, but I have not seen it.
Oh, he had a gun. And you got a gun, and you're a cop, nothing's going to happen to you, You got to shoot somebody. I mean,
Cops are allowed to be
once, right?
scared, and we're not, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
I was afraid, so I get to shoot,
Yeah.
and if we do the same thing in the similar
But,
situation, we would go to jail. That's
I mean, the numbers are. We could go over the number. Numbers don't tell stories. Stories tell stories. And Ashley Babbitt was from what I understand, a delightful woman, and she wasn't violent, and she was a patriot, and in the best sense of the word, and cared about others, and somebody just decided, I'm going to shoot her in the neck, and nothing happened to that person. But you have people who, I remember watching the Antifa
Yes.
people literally beat people into comas and nothing
Yes.
happened to them.
Yes.
I wonder what would happen if those protesters were pro-fall and they beat somebody into a coma. What would have happened?
Or what would have happened to them if they were these so-called MAGA Republicans,
Yeah, yeah.
as Joe
But
Biden might call them.
it's a horrible thing, and I know we have other things to talk about.
Yes.
We could literally spend 24 hours going over example after example after example of selective prosecution. I worked for a wonderful public interest law firm as a fundraiser a while back, and they defended an 83-year-old guy who was thrown in prison for digging a pond on his property to use for firefighting. Why? Because he stood up. And they extorted a witness, one of his neighbors, by threatening to throw her in prison if she didn't testify against the man.
Wow.
And this is craziness. Why did they do that? Who knows? But well, we know why, because he stood up to the thugs of the deep state, and you can't do that.
Yes, as we've pointed out here many times, crimes against policy are treated much worse than crimes against people.
Yes.
If you commit a crime against a public policy, against a governmental policy, they will come after you. But if you punch somebody in the face, they may or may not, depending upon if they like the person you punched or not. That's essentially where we've gone.
Yes.
And so it is time to kind of move on. We're going to discuss homelessness in LA. You know, what we like to call here the homelessness industrial complex is alive and well in LA, and some people are finally starting to notice that it's insane.
And I'm trying to. This is a New York Times article. I take the New York Times because I like to know the enemy, and they were talking about they talked to people in the system there who are, basically their job is to help people with homelessness. And what happens is, because it's so there's NIMBYism going on. The very few homeless housing units that they've put together in Los Angeles cost about $600,000 a piece.
Yes.
I could house 10 people for $600,000 in Missouri, no sweat. But trying to do it where you have a regulatory state that's insanely out of control, like LA. And the NIMBYism that goes on, that not in my backyard, folks.
Yes.
That goes on here, and the myriad of people whose fingers touch it, and the bureaucracies that are growing up around it. Homelessness in San Francisco, they spend $1 billion a year on. That's $100,000 per homeless person, but they're still homeless, and homelessness is growing. Why? Because it's in the best interest of the homelessness industrial state. And it's never going to get solved. It's only going to get worse because we have a Democratic legislature, people in the courts that favor the party, a Democratic governor, and so many regulatory organizations in the state of California that try to prevent things being done. We should call our government the Good Life Prevention Department. That's just it. That's it. And the Prevent Capitalism from Actually Creating Wealth Department.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. But in the case of homelessness, I sit in a coffee house and write and keep other people from getting work done, quite frankly, a lot. and a homeless woman who was having a severe psychotic episode. She had her pants falling down, poop on her butt, just out of her mind, came up, and they called the security guard. They didn't want to call the cops because all they would do is take her and then let her go and do nothing. But, you judge a society on how it takes care of those least able to take care of themselves. And you look at places where traditional values, which are laughed at, and frowned upon and talked about their being old. They what do they call the Constitution? They say, fetishizing that 300-year-old piece of paper. They just cast it aside. You look at go to Utah and see how many homeless people you have on the streets. You're going to be hard pressed to find very many.
Right.
And why? Because churches take them in.
Yes.
And the homelessness that's getting solved in here in the Sacramento area, very effectively, is done by a number of church groups for next to nothing. but you put a government in charge of solving a problem that they created through over-regulating,
Yes.
through closing psychiatric hospitals that can treat the people,
Yeah.
because they closed them for misguided purposes. In the past, people like that would have been taken to a psychiatric hospital and treated. They would have been filled full of fluids because they're dehydrated. They would have been assessed. They'd have been cleaned up. They'd have been assigned somebody to care for them and watch them and all the rest of that. And that's what should be happening now. God knows we pay enough taxes.
Indeed.
I mean, but what is happening? You have this homelessness industrial complex built up, and it's more and more and more expensive to try to get people off the streets and put them in a house. And everybody looks at the situation and says that's not the issue. The underlying issue is not that they're homeless. It's that they are mostly crazy.
Yes.
And you've got to take care of the crazy first. Or they're mostly on drugs and alcohol, and their brains are addled from that, and you've got to take care of that first, and that never gets addressed.
Exactly.
So it's just going to get worse and more expensive and everything else because it's easy to build your bureaucracy and hide the money, and I'm not going to say bribes because we don't call them bribes here, we call them permits. When you're trying to put somebody in a house than in a hospital.
You know what you say is so true, John, because I think 99% of the homeless population is either a drug addict, an alcoholic, or have some kind of mental disorder. Mm. And all of this bureaucracy that you so rightfully talk about is built up around the concept of that we just have to find homes for these people. When these people can't manage their own lives, how are they going to manage a home if you give it to them? Mm. So all of that money, that
better make that home fireproof.
Yeah, true, exactly, right. Make it fireproof.
Burn it down around themselves.
Yeah, and kill all the other people around them too. Yeah. Okay, so the point is though, they first of all they cause the problem. You're right, and then they have these misguided policies in terms of dealing with the problem. Oh, we're just going to try to give them homes. We're going to build all these $600,000 homes and find a little units for them to live in, and everything will be nice and wonderful. We're going to find this utopia for homelessness. But this is never going to work because we're not dealing with the underlying problems. We're not dealing with the drugs, the alcohol, and the mental disease that these people badly need treatment for.
But we're also not dealing with the issues that drive people to drugs and drive people to, because mental illness is often caused by stress. And so you have people who are living at the fringe of society, and they're living in, like here in Sacramento, they closed a bunch of the low-end motels. The last gasp that people have, or that first rung on the ladder of getting back, they closed those. And so they forced those people into homelessness. Well, many of those people were actually functional. They were going to work. They had a functional life. Maybe they had a drug problem or an alcohol problem, but they were still functional.
Boarding house, rooming house type, and in San
and those
Francisco
are all closed.
Of all places, they still have that. One of the reasons that Chinatown can have such an intense density of population is because many of the housing units in Chinatown are that type of thing. Even in San Francisco, in those types of places, people can afford to live. And it's not a bad life if you came from China. I mean, it might not be a good life compared to what you or I are used to now.
But it's better than homelessness, is it
better
not?
than homelessness. And
yes.
So what they have done is create the problem so that they can propose a very pricey bureaucratic solution to, as Leon said, the problem they created.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about another problem the experts have created, inflation. We're all sitting here suffering from inflation. And the reality is the experts were never going to fix what they created because they don't know how. They clearly don't understand that you can't restrict economic activity while printing a buttload of money.
I think, buttload to the 13th. Is it, what is trillions? Trillion is how much? 9, 10? That is 12.
There was literally nothing could happen but inflation.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of
And I want
time.
to throw something in real quick, and then I'll let.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, John. There's no problem. Go ahead, no problem.
The last time that we had an inflationary spiral, a really bad one, back in the Jimmy Carter era.
Yeah, 76 to 80.
When Volcker just said, Jimmy, no, you're not going to inflate your way out of the deficit you created. You're going to be a one-term president here, bro, because we're not going to let you do that. So he didn't use those words, but that's
Yeah,
really
yeah, that was
it.
it. That was
So-
the essence. Yes. Yeah.
So the New York Times just spot on said, well, the money supply grew to such an extent, da 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 da.
Yes.
Well, now they've got, what's the name of that idiot that won a Nobel Prize
Krugman?
for being a lefty?
Paul Krugman.
Talking about the fact that money supply has nothing to do with it. And who's in lockstep with him? The New York Times.
Yes.
Why? Because they are now no longer the newspaper of record for this country, only for the Democratic Party.
Indeed.
And so they know that all these crazy things that were pushed through and all these gimme money programs and all the money that was printed and all the bonds that were bought back are the cause of the problem. They won't admit it. So just because you can cause a problem doesn't mean the same people that caused the problem can fix the problem. That's like saying that the arsonists should be in charge of putting out the fire.
Right.
You don't. The arsonists are the Fed, and they caused it.
Yeah.
And the way to fix it is to put the arsonists in jail. But that's not going to happen. You take the matches away from the arsonist and let commerce fix itself. But are they going to do that? No, because then the Fed wouldn't do the bidding of deep state.
Well, and then you'd let the general population would now know that the Fed really doesn't control things.
No, it can't. It was put into place to try to even out economic uncertainty and remove the fear of the deep recessions that they had in the past, which lasted about a year and then they went away.
Yeah.
But because the Fed and FDR, the last deep recession we had, turned in due to easy money policy, imagine that, like we got now, turned into the Great Depression because of the intervention of the first socialist president of the United States. So anyway, I talked way longer than I meant to talk.
No, it's no
but
problem.
and I didn't use that, I wish I could attribute that quote, don't put the arsonists in charge of putting out the fire. Somebody else did, but it was a great line. I think it was Reason, because they write all the great lines. Great writers.
I'm gonna steal it and probably don't give anybody credit. But this whole problem started. Biden contributed a lot to it. During his time, they put a lot of printed money into the economy.
Well, Trump did before that.
But I was just going to say, it didn't start with.
Yeah, this was a both sides were
started-
all
it
for
started-
both sides were all
since
for spending
Lyndon
as much
Baines
money
Johnson,
as they could.
guns and butter.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and nobody's reined it in except for Volcker during Jimmy Carter's, and then
Yes.
let it go again.
Exactly. So this quantitative easing have been a problem for God knows how long. Okay, and they're printing money, they're putting it into the economy, and it's really distorting market activity.
Yeah.
That's what's going on there. And any economist was worth his salt, except Paul Krugman. Was
Well, you said worth his salt. It's not worth his salt.
He's not worth his
So
salt.
I've talked to a guy in a coffee house, very intelligent man, an attorney who's worked in the public sector his whole life with his fangs stuck as deep in the trough as he possibly can, his trotters in the trough. And he was talking about Krugman. Well, he's a Nobel economist, and I said, yeah, you know what the Nobel Prize is, right? It's lefties giving prizes to lefties.
The lefties, exactly.
And that's like, and he looked at me like, yeah. So anyway, back to what you were saying.
Yeah, but Milton Friedman, who was one of my heroes, he said that
Mine too.
when you see these money printing going on, vast money printing, usually it takes about 18 months for it to filter through the economy, and then you feel the effects of inflation. So he had proposed that maybe the printing of money should be stable around about 2%, to somewhat match economic growth. And he had proposed that, and let interest rates fall where they may, and let the marketplace, the bond markets and that determine interest rates and all that kind of stuff.
Imagine that, the market determining something.
Imagine that. Right?
Sounds almost like capitalism to me.
Yeah, wow, be careful, John, be careful.
It sounds too much like freedom and liberty to me.
Oh,
Let people kind of decide for
Be careful what
themselves.
you're saying.
Just,
and people making choices for themselves, man. You got to be careful here. But the point is, if I could close off there, is that what the Fed is doing and what they have been doing for a long time is they're trying to pull the levers up and down, up and down. We have a complex economy ongoing right now. Many
No
industries, many trillions of interactions every day between individuals and between organizations. And the feds are there trying to pull this lever up and down, and trying to quote unquote manage the economy. They can't. It's humanly
could,
impossible.
Never will.
Yes.
You can't. There's no way. When you talked about the number of interactions and permutations and vagaries of weather and all the rest of that stuff, that you talk about weather being complex. Look at a global economy. It's unmanageable. And trying to manage, it's like Wizard of Oz. Remember behind the curtain?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
It was the wizard.
Yes.
But the wizard was a fake. Was a phony. He didn't know what he was doing. These are fakes and phonies, folks. Don't put your faith in them
Yes.
because they're not worth it.
They're the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, pulling the levers, and get nothing. Okay? Get nothing. We get inflation out of it. That's what we get.
Yeah, we try to be controlled. We've got like 2 minutes, so we're going to get one thing about fakes and phonies. Kanye West and AOC don't have a lot in common, except both seem to have, shall we say, anti-Semitic leanings. The question becomes, why do people like Kanye West pay such a high price for those leanings, and people like AOC and her squad companions pay no price at all?
Because
that's the question.
When you're a friend of the left, you can get away with stuff. You can get away with anti-Semitism. And AOC and the squad, they get away with it God knows how many times. But Kanye West is not a friend of the left because he supports Donald Trump. So when he said his ridiculous statement, which I agree it was ridiculous and probably anti-Semitic, then they had to punish him. But they do not punish the other side because they are friends of the left.
And not just friends of the left, but them being in their elected positions and not thrown out allows the left to maintain the power that it's had.
Yes.
And well, you made the point, and I'm just ruining it now for you. But it's pretty obvious. It's like that, what you said, the selective application of punishment and power.
Yeah.
And here it is again, folks.
But I just want to point out that, accountability and punishment are not necessarily the same thing. You can be held accountable without being punished. And we've kind of seemed to have lost that in society these days.
A lot of times accountability is recognizing good as well. It's
Right.
catching people doing things right. And as soon as any of these clowns in office do something right, I want to catch them at it.
Yep. And we are out of time. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week. And please remember, from Libertarian Counterpoint, to love everybody.
Yes, indeed.
Good.
James, thank you. That was a good show.
It really was.
Leon, it's always a pleasure.